Hello and welcome to the Vaults of Terra. My name is Ed and today we're going to be continuing our Imperial Guard videos by having a look at the Imperial Guard Armoury. Now we're going to split this up over 3 videos. The first one, this one, is going to concern the Imperial Guard's weaponry, both long range and close combat, although not including their vehicle weaponry, which will take place in the second video, which is going to be the vehicles video. The final Armoury video will concern the Imperial Guard's equipment and any armour that they use on the battlefield of the 41st millennium. So let's get started. The first weapon I want to talk about is the most ubiquitous with the Imperial Guard, and that is the Lasgun. Now, the Lasgun is a very widespread weapon in the Imperium, and it is a laser-based weapon, as the name would suggest, although it looks very similar to an assault rifle from the modern day. Now, it is a standard issue weapon for the Imperial Guard, and it is very basic in its technology for the 41st millennium. In fact, it's one of the most widespread weapons in the Imperium, not just the Imperial Guard. Now, how it works is that it uses a series of focused laser crystals in order to fire a beam through the entire weapon and out of the barrel, focusing it on a single point. Now, this superheats that point to the point where it will literally vaporize under the amount of heat stress it is under. Now, the destructive potential of the weapon does depend on the material it's firing against. On a highly reflective or absorptive surface, such as ceramite armour or even a mirror, the las weapon would do very little damage. However, against standard metal or soft armour or even flesh, the weapon can be quite devastating. Now, it is powered by a rechargeable pack, which is actually in front of the trigger guard, and this is the direct energy source of the shots that are fired. Now, the amount of shots that can be fired vary widely depending on the model of the lasgun, and it can go from 90 shots to up to 150 shots depending on the amount of power used and the fire select settings that the lasgun uses, as it does have 3 fire select settings: full automatic, burst and single shot, much like the assault weapons of the modern day. It's renowned for its reliability and durability, something that we wouldn't consider when we think of lasers in the modern age, but in the 41st millennium they are so well understood and manufactured by the Mechanicum that you could literally use the weapon as a club and still go back to firing the gun with relative ease without thinking of misaligning any of the focusing crystals or doing any real damage to the interior of the gun. Hence why it's such a standard issue weapon, because it can be put through hell and still function. Now, the same can be said of the power pack. Now, this of course is charged usually at the unitorum stations, where they will usually power it up using a generator of some kind. However, in a pinch, if the soldier is out in the field of battle or if they have a long range patrol, they can actually recharge their lasgun power pack over an open flame. Now, this means that they can still use their weapon even when they don't have access to direct supplies from the unitorum, even though this will damage the power pack and can eventually render it useless or reducing its shot rate quite substantially, because it is not designed to receive power in this way. Now, there is not one unified design for the lasgun. It can be made from anything from smooth burnished chrome to mostly wood with the electronic parts inserted into it. Of course, they have a similar exterior look, but the materials they are made from are very different. Now, this can also lead to variants such as the las carbine, which is a cut-down version of the lasgun, usually used by infiltration specialists, and it sacrifices some range and power for the ability to be highly portable and taken wherever it's needed. Now, one thing about the lasgun I want to mention before we move on is that there is a little bit of a debate about why it has a stock, because as a laser-based weapon, there's very little chance it could actually cause any recoil, because it's not actually firing anything like a modern-day solid projectile weapon. All it's doing is firing a laser. Now, this does make a rather interesting cracking noise as it superheats the air, but it doesn't mean that there's actually any sort of kickback from the weapon. So there's a few theories about why they do have a stock and why it's needed. Most concern maybe that there's an internal mechanism that retracts on every shot, which is a little bit far-fetched for a laser-based weapon. My personal opinion is that the stock is mainly used for aiming, as it's very hard to aim a weapon that you can't brace against your shoulder and look down the iron sights. So that's probably the reason they have a stock, even though I'm not sure there is actually any kickback in that weapon. So, now I've mentioned the lasgun, I want to go on to the las pistol, which is a cut-down version of the lasgun. Now, this does reduce its range and firepower, however it does mean it's very portable, and it is just as durable and modifiable as the lasgun counterpart. It doesn't have a fire selector, but it is incredibly portable, and is in fact used by most junior officers in the Imperial Guard, until they're worthy enough to receive something like a plasma pistol or a bolt pistol, which I'll briefly mention later. Now, las pistols can be even more varied in design than lasguns, mainly because they can be used in civilian life, and so many will be very highly ornate, while some will be even more utilitarian. However, they still share the same design philosophy as does the Lasgun. Now, another laser-based weapon that I want to talk about is the Hellgun. Now, the Hellgun is also called the Hotshot Lasgun, and it is actually an enhanced version of the standard Lasgun. Now, it's commonly issued to Special Forces Imperial Guards such as the Stormtroopers for its superior armor penetration capabilities. Now, it's also a high-energy weapon, and it's got more potent destruction than a common Lasgun, more able to damage things like ceramite armour, and armour that will usually reflect or absorb most of the power of a Lasgun because of its intense heat. Now, it does use an external energy source. It doesn't have a usual power pack. It usually has a backpack power source, which has a cable which runs from the grip or the usual charging point of a Lasgun to the backpack, and allows it to fire as many shots as a Lasgun, although it does mean it's a lot heavier and more cumbersome to use. It's also a lot more complex, requiring reinforced barrels, thermal cooling cells, and gyro-stabilizing power packs. What that does mean is that if the weapon is damaged, it's far harder to repair than standard Lasgun. Because of this, that does mean that it's not issued to regular troopers in the Imperial Guard unless it's really needed, because they're more likely to use it as a club in the heat of battle, and then they damage it, and then the Mechanicum's angry. Thus, it's more likely to be used by specialists who know how to use the weapon. And moving on to one of the last laser-based weapons I want to talk about is the long las. Now, a long las is actually a sniper variation of the Lasgun with a much longer barrel, which increases the range and accuracy and prevents overheating from using hot shot power packs, which are usually one use and then they are used up, but they do a lot more damage than their standard counterpart and can be used in sniper warfare as very accurate and powerful guns, because they don't have to consider things like the planet spinning, the Coriolis effect, or wind direction, which a common sniper would have to deal with, because the laser will go straight through all that and do direct damage at incredible distances. Now, of course, because they have a longer barrel, it makes it a lot more unwieldy in close combat, and so a long las will usually be used from a great distance and will very rarely be issued to a guardsman who is going to be on the front line. Usually they'll be slightly further back in snipers' nests or part of infiltration teams, dealing with the enemy at long range rather than getting up close and personal in the trenches. It also has a sound and flash suppressor at the end of its barrel. Now, obviously that sounds a little bit weird. How can you have a flash suppressor on a laser? Well, it's more keeping the beam more focused on the target so that others around it couldn't see the flash of the laser as it goes off. And because the air is superheated by the laser, I'm not sure how they managed to lower the sound, but it could be a way of focusing it that means that it's not at the range of human hearing. I don't know. It's just, this is what we've been told in the technical specs, and it'll be interesting to see how the Games Workshop comes up with a way of dealing with the fact that it has a sound suppressor on a Lasgun. One thing to say about the fact that it uses hotshot power packs is that it does cause a lot of damage to the barrel, even though it's designed to absorb a lot of punishment. So the barrel of a long las is regularly replaced, otherwise it warps beyond usefulness, and thus the long las is rendered completely useless. Now, moving on, the Imperial Guard do use standard issue sniper rifles. Now, they are solid shot, as you all know, and they actually pack a little bit more of a punch when they hit the enemy because they're solid shot, and they can be loaded with all sorts of things like explosive rounds, ignition rounds, and even poisoned rounds, which are used by a lot of snipers. However, their most common usage is among the Ratlings, who are a specialist abhuman race, who I will talk about in more detail later on. However, they are quite few and far between. However, they do prefer the solid shot sniper rifle to the long las used by most Imperial Guardsmen. Now, moving on from standard weaponry, there is a weapon that's used exclusively by the Ogryns, giant abhumans, who are considered relatively mentally slow by the Imperial Guard. So, what they're given is not a standard Lasgun, as they would break that in half the moment they got hold of it. They are given large Ogryn Ripper guns. These are huge, brutal, and very simple weapons designed for use by the Ogryns. Now, it's a heavy automatic shotgun, essentially, but with much more range, built as simply as possible in order to survive being used by the Ogryns, who commonly go into battle just wielding it like a club, rather than actually using it to shoot people. Now, of course, it doesn't give much to aim, because an Ogryn doesn't aim. It points the gun in the direction it used to fire, and fires, usually hitting everything else but the target in the process. However, it's a very effective weapon when it does hit the enemy, dealing a massive amount of damage, and can be compared to an Astartes bolt gun, although the Holy bolt gun is far superior to the Ogryn Ripper gun in terms of mechanics and in terms of killing power. Now, another weapon used by the Imperial Guard is a grenade launcher. Now, this is a handheld weapon used by stormtroopers and some other specialists in order to launch grenades over walls or long distances and cause a lot of devastation among massed enemy units, such as hordes. Now, it's very damaging, and it's also very simple to use, and we have them today in the modern world, so I won't really go over their workings here. But they aren't as common issue as some other weapons, as they are very situational, and using a grenade launcher causes a lot of collateral damage, and so it's much more preferable to use a lasgun for pinpoint shots rather than using a grenade launcher to hit everything within a 10-meter radius. Now, a basic weapon that I didn't mention previously is the autogun and the auto pistol. Now, these are what we'd call standard weapons of the modern day. They are solid shot weapons that fire at different rates, semi-automatic, automatic, single shot, and they are just standard assault rifles. However, because of the prevalence of las weaponry, the standard solid shot weaponry, which requires certain amounts of ammunition and gunpowder and many different parts, is not used as much in the Imperial Guard because it's just easier to have the standard lasgun. Some cultures will use it though if it's the common weapon on the planet, and if they're trying to use it a lot more than they have the lasgun, it's far easier for them to use an autogun and compensate for all the recoil and collateral damage that could cause, rather than retraining them with a lasgun and just getting them inefficient at using both. Now, the Immunitorum doesn't like this because the Immunitorum likes standardization, but it will provide weapons and ammunition for regiments that do prefer using the autogun. Now, a step up from the autogun is something called the Heavy Stuber. Now, we would all identify this as a machine gun, something that's got a tripod, is fixed, and can be rotated to fire and cover arcs of fire on a battlefield. It can be attached to the pintle mount of a tank, but it can be also used as a standard emplacement weapon and can suppress enemy units on a battlefield without having to use some of the bigger weapons and waste their ammunition. The step up from the Heavy Stuber goes back to the auto weapons in the Autocannon. Now, this is a tank weapon, really. It's something that you would see on the turret of a tank. However, it can be detached and used on rolling gun casings, much like they did have in World War I and II, where this is like an artillery piece. However, it's quite rapid fire, and so allows for a great deal of damage to be done to heavily armoured enemies on the battlefield. Although it's not got the strength to really pierce tank armour, it's more used against infantry, although even heavy infantry like the Space Marines may be able to resist it. Now, a final weapon I want to talk about specifically in the ranged category is the Flamer. Now, Space Marines use a Flamer as well, but the flamethrower used by the Imperial Guard is much more prevalent, as it's much easier to use for them, and it fits far more with their policy of cleanse and burn. They just go forward with the flamethrower and just put it into a horde of enemies or into trench warfare where they can clear trenches and just deal a huge amount of damage with liquid promethium, which is a very sticky substance and can cause horrific wounds to the enemy. Although it's not always guaranteed that death is at the end of it, it does mean that there's a lot of pain. They do use other weapons in the Imperial Guard: bolt weapons, plasma weapons and melter weapons. Now, they're very uncommon as they're very technical, they are quite situational, and so are preferably used by the Space Marines, not the Imperial Guard. However, they will be used if the regiment comes from a wealthy enough technological world, or if they are needed on a battlefield where there's a lot of intense fighting going on. Now, the Imperial Guard also use tube missile launchers, which can fire crack or frag missiles at enemies. Now, I've already discussed those in my Space Marines Armoury, and if you want to hear about all these weapons, please do go to the Space Marines Armoury, and I will describe bolters, plasma weapons, melter weapons, and missile launchers in greater detail. Now, to close today, I'll just talk about close combat weapons. Those are, again, similar to those used by the Space Marines. They are chainswords, power weapons, and force weapons, all used by the Space Marines, and so if you go to my Space Marines Close Combat Armoury, you'll learn more about them there, although they are scaled down to be used by a mortal as opposed to an Astartes. However, one weapon that is used by the Imperial Guard, by their Rough Riders specifically, is a lance. Now, a lance is something you would expect. It's a large poled weapon with a blade on the end, used by riders in order to charge into the enemy, deal damage from their mount without having to get too close and get attacked by the enemy directly. Now, these can be fitted with a number of different heads, specifically things like explosive heads or flamethrowers at the end. Basically, they could have modified weapons at the end of their lances in order to deal a lot of damage at range whilst still riding from the back of their mount. And although there are specifics, I won't go into them right now. I may deal with it when I do more focus on the Rough Riders later on. So, that's everything I wanted to mention today in relation to the weapons of the Imperial Guard. If you think I might have missed something, do mention it in the comments below, or go to the Vox Relay, which is the Vaults of Terra forum. I'm going to put a link in the comments box below. Go there, and we have discussions on things like what should come next, and what you think might need to be improved with the video, or if there's anything you want to see on the Vaults of Terra, which I'm not currently doing. And it's also a good place to get a little bit more information on what I'm doing at the moment, although I'm not on there every day, of course. Now, one final thing, Peter and I have put up another Starbound video, so do click on the link in the description below and go and watch that. It's another session of us just talking about things, and then Slaneshian cultists turn up. It's all good fun. So I hope you've enjoyed today. See you next time on the Vaults of Terra.